How can anyone resent the notion of an Indigenous voice to Parliament when we look at the huge influence on government that lobbyists from industries such as energy, mining and resources, banking and finance, gambling and hospitality, real estate, and the big pharmaceutical companies already have?
Good.
So, look, I do think we need to separate that and talk about the voice first. The voice is about listening, and it's about making sure that we recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of this country, because it is the right thing to do.
But Helen's question was about the contrast with who gets access and voices in the Parliament.
So, look, I think it's important that the voice is going to provide that independent advice both to government and to the executive government. It's going to be independent of government and be made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people acting on the issues and policies that will affect them at the end of the day. I suppose with regards to lobby groups and firms, as the questioner was saying, those groups also do represent their members, and they do provide some advocacy for their members. But what the voice is about is that it's there to give advice to government. This is what's good, this is what's bad. Now it's up to government to listen, because we know that when we have a top-down, Canberra-based approach, we don't get better outcomes. Consultation is so key, and making sure that we're listening to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And on that note, just the power of listening. There will be some medical professionals in the crowd, I know. Jana knows this as well, that the most powerful aspect of being a health professional is the patient history. It's actually listening to the patient, because more often than not, before you do any blood tests or before you do any scan, CT, X-ray, you can actually formulate what's called a provisional diagnosis. You can find out what's wrong with the patient and start to instigate that treatment and that treatment plan, which can ultimately reduce harm, but also to decrease the likelihood of morbidity and mortality. And that's the power of listening to one person at one moment in time in a hospital bed. Imagine what we can do on a bigger scale if we recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and listen to them about the issues and the policies that affect us.
I want to go to Helen's substantial question, though, because it's about the contrast of who gets a voice in the Parliament. And she talks about lobbyists and what she considers to be a disproportionate level of power that they have. Danielle, we've spoken on my radio show about your own report into that power and lobbying. What do you make of the point she's trying to make and ask a question about?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really interesting parallel that she's drawing. And so Gordon is right. Consultation matters. Getting in front of decision makers and being able to put your point of view matters. And when we look at the moment around who gets that access, we ran the numbers looking at ministerial diaries in Queensland and New South Wales, where they actually publish them and you can see who ministers meet with. It is disproportionately well-resourced groups, businesses and unions. Helen, I think, mentioned mining and resources, property, gambling. We found all of those got a disproportionate share of face time compared to their role in the broader economy. So I think it is an interesting parallel. Given consultation matters, the idea of creating a body that is there to advise government, made up of First Nations people, consulting on First Nations issues. I mean, I think it can only be a good thing and a balancing of that public debate.
Aaron, the Prime Minister's announcing the date on Wednesday, the worst kept secret in Canberra, unless he wants to surprise us all. But we think it's October the 14th. Yes. You've supported the no case.
Yep.
You've just heard the point Helen makes in the question and the point Danielle makes on the numbers about who gets access to government. Does that sound fair to you?
Well, I would make the point on Helen's question that Indigenous Australians have access, and I'll address the voice as well, but the Coalition of the Peaks exists. So there's mechanisms at the moment where Indigenous Australians can make representations and do make representations to government. And if they didn't, as an example, well, what has been happening for the last 16 months with the Albanese government? So there are organisations and mechanisms in place. And the question, to Gordon's point, is how do we look to improve that system to make sure that we have better mechanisms so Indigenous voices can be heard? So I support the coalition position. I support constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians. One of my concerns and the reason I support the legislated voices is that I'm passionate about local, regional and a national voice. And the reason local voices are so important, in my community in Casey, we've got a wonderful Indigenous community, the Wurundjeri people. Corrandirk was an establishment in Victoria. I've been blessed to grow up in that area. I've got many friends that are Indigenous, and it's shaped my experience. And the reality is that the challenges that the community in Hillsville face are different to the challenges that Gordon's Indigenous community face. The Indigenous community in far north Queensland or Arnhem Land or Western Australia face vastly different challenges, and that's why a local voice is so important.
Sure, but that could still... A constitutional body could be created and then you, the parliamentarian, designs that local voice, right?
But correct, but I don't believe we should be changing the Constitution on a hope.
But if you think that the voice is a good idea, which you've just articulated, why not in the Constitution?
Because if we legislate, it's a safer model, it takes away all risk, and it means...
Is the safety that you can remove it?
No, the safety is you can adjust the mechanism.
But you can change the legislation even if it's in the Constitution.
But the other risk is that the High Court will make decisions, and we don't know. There has been many... There is a level of risk. How high that is, we don't know. How wide that is, we don't know. There always has to be... There is some risk because ultimately the High Court will make the decision. Many legal experts have come out and said there is minimal risk, but so we don't know how a High Court will interpret cases. That's the reality of the High Court.
Do we agree that how things are at the moment in Australia and the setup is not working?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I think that it's about as well the message that a no vote would send to Indigenous Australians.
So can I share one story on Indigenous Australians? As I said, I've engaged deeply with my community, with my Indigenous community, and 24 hours before I had to give my speech in Parliament on The Voice, I spoke to an Indigenous leader in my community who is a wonderful person that I've known for many years. And he said to me, please don't support this voice. I do not, as a leader in my community, support this voice, and many others don't. And when I asked him why, because that shocked me, he said to me, my community has not been consulted at any stage through this process. And if our voice has not been heard during the consultation stage, how will we be heard with a voice? And then I said and this was the other part, I said to him, can I share your story? And he said, yes, you can. I said, can I share your name? And he said, no, because the repercussions for me will be significant.
But it's not either or, is it? Like, can't it be both?
And that's what I'm saying. If you have the and one of my objections is that so people say it will close the gap. We don't know whether it will close the gap because we don't have the information on how the Wurundjeri community, how their voice will be heard, how that will ladder to a regional voice, how that will ladder to a national voice.
We don't know anything about your legislated voice either, by that token.
And doing nothing won't.
But that's what
Sorry, could I just jump in there? Yeah. You've been... I think you're generalising and lumping all Aboriginal people into the one group.
I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying that
we're not a homogenous group. We will have different ideas, different political ideology and different ways we think this could progress. But I think the important thing to remember is the voice is about the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and that was the result of significant regional dialogues right across the country, culminating in that Constitutional Convention in 2017, which led to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, a gracious, powerful document that has called for constitutional recognition through a voice.
No, I agree with you. I'm saying the same thing in you in terms of it's not one Indigenous voice and there's not one homogenous Indigenous voice. And the Uluru Statement of the Heart, I researched, I spoke to the Minister, Linda Burney. Not one Wurundjeri person was involved in the Uluru Statement of the Heart or the referendum working group either.
I want to bring in a few others, if I can, into the conversation too. Jana, I know you've been watching...
I'm out of this one.
You're out.
No, in all truth, I actually found it, when we always say as medical professionals, we speak to people at a Year 8 level, I have found this incredibly confusing. So we were in the callroom. We were in the green room beforehand and Gordon was explaining very beautifully what the Constitution is. But I'm like, if I am doing my PhD and if I don't understand the entire concepts behind the yes and the no, how on earth am I going to vote correctly to make sure my people are safe? All people Aboriginal people and every culture that beautifully diversifies Australia. So I don't know what to do in this situation if I'm struggling with this decision.
So you're undecided?
Well, I think I'm a very strong yes, but then now I'm hearing that it's not what I thought it was. So it's a confusing message, and I feel like I am well read and well versed in this space, and even more so after the conversation with Gordon previously. But I just feel a little bit like it's really hard to make these decisions on behalf of people that I don't, that I am not speaking for.
Okay. Today, Peter Dutton said that people would be bullied into voting yes. Do you think that's what's going on?
Well, I mean, if I use the example of the Indigenous elder that I spoke to, he was not comfortable for his view to be shared publicly because of repercussions. I think
but are people being bullied?
Well, bullying there is certainly a societal pressure and expectation.
But why is the polling showing that no is trending positively if there's such bullying for the yes case?
Well, I'm not saying no one can be forced to vote yes or no, because when you're in the privacy of the polling booth...
Just you and your pencil.
Yeah, you can do exactly right, but there is certainly, there is certainly a discussion in the media, in sporting corporations, these kind of things. It's a conversation that I've had many people, Patricia, say to me, I'm voting no, but I'm not telling people because I don't feel comfortable. So I'm not saying people are being bullied, but there is certainly an emotive conversation that is part of what's happening. And
last question to you. The opposition leader has also really been questioning, whether there's ticks and there's strikes, and the AEC has come out pretty strongly. Do you support the institution of the AEC and its independence?
I support the institution of the AEC and its independence.
Should it be defended?
We should always defend the AEC. We're very fortunate in this country to have a strong, independent electoral commission, and they're going through a redistribution at the moment, and you compare that to a lot of other countries, and that will be a completely independent process that will make sure that the notion of one vote is upheld. But I would say there is a question of perceptions. Most people would say that a tick means yes and a cross means no.
But it's never been the way that the AEC has conducted anything, right?
Can we not improve things, PK?
But what did you think of it when the machinery bill was going through?
I would say, because in the legislation, it doesn't reference ticks or crosses. It references yes and no, and then it references savings provisions, which allows the AEC to make a determination.
Okay.
They've made but that's important because there's a perception that the legislation outlined yes and no, ticks and crosses. It doesn't do that. It gives the AEC a mechanism for a savings provision. And what I would say is I absolutely believe the independence of the AEC is important. Democracy is too valuable to be risked. The result of the referendum is also crucial. And if there is any perception of impropriety...
Aren't you creating the perception?
So why wouldn't we just create a mechanism to remove the perception?
I want to commend the No campaign on making this so much more complicated than it needs to be. They are remarkable. I feel like it's this really modest, incredibly simple proposal that's being put forward about constitutional recognition, which has been supported by multiple governments. And it's so clear. And then the No campaign has just come in and it's like... now I don't even know whether to tick it or not. Yeah. I think I'm going to vote
You're
wrong.
actually meant to write yes or no, and that's what you're meant to do.
Write yes or no.
That's the rule.
This is a perfect example, right? This is a tiny fraction of people that are going to tick or cross. We know people will understand to write yes or no.
Correct.
And by elevating it to the level it is, it does look like it's calling into question the AEC. It does look like we're attacking institutions.
But it's not post-referendum, it's pre. We've got an opportunity now to adjust
this is a tiny fraction of votes. I mean, why couldn't we have done this in a more silent way? It just looks like it's trying to sow these seeds of confusion, and that's what concerns me.
All right, we're going to hear...